Good morning, church. Well, following on from Nick's message yesterday on Lauda Equiana as part of our focus on Black History Month and looking at church history as part of that, we're going to think this morning about another character that really needs to take some of our attention and time today, I think anyway. His name is David George. He was born around 1743. Now, the thing about David George was that he was born and he was a second generation slave. Just take a moment to even try and get your head around that just a little bit. A second generation slave. At the age of 19, he ran away from home because he witnessed his mother getting whipped and she was left to die. And so he fled his home. And he was picked up, he was traded a couple of times, and finally settled in a plantation in South Carolina. Now, in that time, we read that he had a realization of his sin. I mean, I don't know about you, I can't believe that. You would think he would perhaps have a realization of other people's sin, and I'm sure he did, but he had a realization of his own sin, and he's said to have said this: "I saw myself as a mass of sin. At last, in prayer to God, I began to think that he would deliver me, but I did not know how." An amazing prayer. And wouldn't you know it, just a little while later, one of David's childhood friends miraculously passed through the town where David was on that plantation. They met, they talked, and his friend, who was by the name of George Leal, spoke to him about Matthew 11:28, and as he did that, David George realized that he himself was weak and heavy laden and burdened, and yet Jesus had come that he could give that burden, that heaviness to his God, and he did that. And so David George, his wife, and 6 other slaves got baptized. And that was in between 1773 and 1775, somewhere in that time. They got baptized, and that then formed the first all-black Baptist church in North America. Now, soon after this, the Revolutionary War broke out, and the owner of David George fled the town, which meant that actually David George became free. Now, they then obviously had decisions to make, and so they also fled that area, and they eventually settled in what is now called Canada. And in 1783, David George formed the first Baptist church in Canada. Amazing. And over the next 6 months, they saw some incredible growth. And that wasn't just with black people coming to know Jesus, attending their church. This was white people as well. And unfortunately for David, when he baptized a white couple, in fact I think it was his first white couple, a riot broke out. It was rare enough to see somebody getting baptized by full immersion in those days, but to see a black man baptize a white couple unfortunately caused unrest in the area, which then resulted in persecution of Christians, or persecution of black people too, of course. And David's home was destroyed, his church was nearly burnt down completely. And yet he continued to preach the gospel. He continued, in fact, started to go on missionary tours, sharing the good news of Jesus. But a major downside to that unrest was that more black people found themselves in slavery, and David George wanted to do something about it, so he partnered with others around him, and apparently through the narrative accounts that he wrote, that helped bring about the abolition of the slave trade. But it didn't stop there. David George is said to have looked for free black people to take back to Africa. And so in 1792, he took 15 ships across the sea to Sierra Leone, saving nearly 2,000 black people. And it was there in Sierra Leone that he founded the first Baptist church in Africa. Incredible. What an amazing story of a man who started out in slavery came to a place where he was free in his soul, but then free with his life and liberty also, and then used that freedom for good. Now, there's many things that I think that you and I can take from that account of David George's life, but I think the one for me that struck me, and it's exactly the same principle from Eluda Equiano yesterday that Nick shared, and that's that when David was a slave, all that potential, all that love, all that value that he had in God, there was a sense where it was limited to what he could do in those circumstances. And so stuck in that slavery, it didn't take away his identity, it didn't take away his value. In fact, he still had potential, and he still came to know Jesus in those difficult times. But the point is this: when he became free, when he found his freedom, he was then able to take the word of God around freely to those, well, not even just those around him. He formed a church in North America, in Canada, and then in Africa. Amazing. And it just made me think about how many thousands of people, thousands upon thousands, perhaps as many as 150 million actually, are stuck in slavery around the world, who need to come to a place of freedom, who need people like you and me to use the freedom that we have to help them. Now, that's a big thing to say. The question is, how on earth do we go about that? Well, as you'll know from the video earlier in the week, on Saturday it was supposed to be the A21 Walk for Freedom that we've done for the past couple of years. We obviously can't do that this year, but we can tune in to the summit. So that's going to be broadcast 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Saturday. And if you can't make those times, it will be recorded, and you can just pick it up on YouTube. We'll send the links so that you can pick it up another time. But I really want to encourage you. I really want you to be inspired by those such as Eluda Equiano and David George, who had a significant part to play in eradicating slavery. Now, we might not be able to go as far as they did, but we can do something. And I really would encourage you to tune in this Saturday or whenever you can to learn what you can do to make a difference and to use your freedom to help others find theirs.